This pinned bishop absolutely wrecks Black's game. Let's see what happens. This is from round 3 of the Rochester Open. It's an over-the-board classical event, and we get a King's Indian defense, and I throw out my specialty pawn to h3 on move 6. I play this both with the knight on f3, and sometimes I put the knight on e2. So I have a ChessGoals opening course, link in the description. In that course, the knight ends up on e2. In this case, we got the knight on f3. So now I play bishop to g5. The idea here is I want the queen coming up to d2, lining up this bishop to h6 threat, trying to expose the black king by trading off the bishop on g7, also provoking this move h6, which can become a weak pawn for black down the road. My opponent plays h6. I drop the bishop back, and now here black almost always plays pawn to e5, fighting for the dark squares. Now, after I push past, this is where the fun begins. Look at my control of the light squares and black's control of the dark squares. So when you see that pawn chain pointing up towards my king, usually that means that black wants to play pawn to f5. That's going to be their break. But with this h3 system, white's able to have a lot of fun because now I can play g4 coming up and prevent the f5 break. So black plays knight e8, going for f5. Here we go, pawn to g4. So now I have all of these pawns on light squares. I have 2 pawns attacking the f5 square, and it's almost always a bad idea for black to play pawn to f5 in these cases, but a lot of times black still plays it anyways. My opponent plays a5. This is trying to control the dark squares. It's a good move. And usually what black will do is combine this a5 pawn with knight to c5. And this knight on d7 will sit really nicely on the c5 square. And then a lot of times this pawn will push up a4, a3, and that can be useful if I decide to castle queenside. So here I play knight to d2. I think it was a little bit better to play queen to d2, but I was a bit rusty with the knight on f3 variations. Usually, like I mentioned, my knight's on e2. So I retreated. My opponent plays queen to h4, and this queen is very pesky. She's pinning this pawn to my rook. She's also pinning this pawn to my king. And the queen's just a little annoying because what I'd really like to do is push these pawns on the king side, but she's slowing down all of those threats. So here I did something that's tough to do for any chess player. I admitted my mistake and I brought the knight right back. It's hard to do, but sometimes you got to do that. If you make a move and you realize, hey, it's actually best to just admit my mistake, you got to play the best move. So here, black retreats, queen to e7. So essentially, he got a free queen move. He got the queen to e7 for free, but will that move be useful? Only time will tell. Now I play rook to g1, lining the rook up with the black king. This is also a good way to discourage black from playing pawn to f5. And then my plan going forward is I would like to play queen to d2, lining up this battery on h6, put my bishop on e2. He's also pointing kingside, and then queenside castle. So black plays knight to c5, the natural square, and I go queen to d2. Immediate threat of bishop takes h6. He guards with king to h7, so now we have 2 defenders and 2 attackers. Here I play pawn to g5. This is an AlphaZero inspired idea. So when the AlphaZero chess engine came onto the scene, what it taught us is you can play for these really long positional kingside attacks. So this is a long-term weakness in the black camp after he plays pawn to h5. My pawn on g5 does a great job attacking these dark squares, and I have this hole on h4 that I can utilize for my knight later. And my h3 pawn does a great job guarding g4, so there's no bishop to g4. So this is just a long-term kingside attack by playing pawn to g5. And a lot of times what you'll notice is players don't want to play a move like this if it looks like the position's getting closed, but keep these long-term attacking ideas in mind. This is AlphaZero's inspiration. So after h5, I play queenside castle. And now here, it's hard to find a good move for black. He really doesn't want to push the f-pawn. The b pawn is stuck. So the only break that's really remaining is pawn to c6. He plays it right away. Now, one of my strategies lately in over-the-board classical chess is to play more quickly in the opening, saving time for the endgames. And overall, this has been paying off. But this game, it backfired. I made this next move very quickly. If you want to try to see the tactic, put it down in the comments below. What's the best move for white here? The move I played was king to b1. This is a mistake. The correct answer is bishop takes c5. And after d takes c5, I can play pawn to d6, threatening the queen and threatening pawn to d7, forking bishop and knight. After queen to d7, trying to block this pawn, now there's a really nice move. Knight to a4, and black is in huge trouble because the knight is threatening knight to b6 with a fork, and it's threatening knight takes c5, hitting the black queen. This is pretty much over. It's a +4 advantage already for white. So if you found that, congrats. That's a much stronger move than what I played, king to b1. Now my opponent played bishop to d7, and that same trick doesn't work because there's a piece on d7. So it's not nearly as strong. So here I play rook to g3. Kind of an interesting idea, slow playing this position a little bit, but what I'm thinking is I use the rook to defend the h-pawn because we do have that black bishop attacking it. And I would love to play bishop to e2 and bring the knight to h4. So I'm trying to maneuver these pieces and slowly improve my kingside attack. And I don't feel that black has enough counterplay over here on the queen side. My opponent plays c takes d5. Now here you have to think, which way do we capture back? C pawn, E pawn, with the knight, with the queen, or do we insert bishop takes c5? It's a tough decision, but knight takes d5 I think is the obvious move. And if you're not going to play knight takes d5, you should take this knight and then play knight takes d5. And the reason for this is we want to change the pawn structure because this knight is a monster on d5. Look at how he controls all of these squares in black's camp. He cannot be kicked by a pawn, so there's no c pawn or e pawn that can kick the knight. And we have this backward pawn on d6 with the queen and rook lined up against it. And this is going to prove critical in just a couple of moves. So knight takes d5 is a monster move. The only good move here is actually queen to e6, and black is still much better. In this position, though, my opponent played queen to d8. Now, this is where the pinned bishop comes into play. If you want to pause the video, try to find the best move for white. Drop it in the comments below. This is move number 20. What is the best move for white? How do we take advantage of the pinned bishop on the d file? This pinned bishop causes the loss for black, and the move is bishop takes c5. The only move is to play d takes c5, and now I can simply drop the knight back, exposing the bishop on the d file with my queen and rook lined up. There's no way to move the bishop to safety because I have queen takes queen, and there's no way to defend the bishop. Knight to f6 is guarded by the pawn, for example. So here my opponent plays f5, a last-ditch attempt to try to get a little bit of counterplay. I play queen takes d7. He swaps queens. And then he plays f takes e4. And I play knight to d2. And here my opponent resigns. The reason I played knight to d2 is because if rook takes f2, for example, I have knight c takes e4, attacking the rook. And after the rook retreats, rook to b3. And look at how every black piece is tied down. This bishop is a bad piece on g7. It's running into a pawn. This knight on e8, all of its squares are controlled or blocked. This rook on a8 is stuck playing passive. And this rook on f5 doesn't attack anything. Both of my rooks are coming to the 7th rank and creating threats. My knight attacks this pawn, so that's another threat. So this is a complete control position. I love these style positions, and that's why I played knight back to d2. If rook a7, for example, I have rook to b6, and black is completely stuck. So I felt pretty good about the quality of this game. I think the main takeaways to improve on are to work on the opening a bit and watch for tactics, even if I'm speeding up my play in the opening. So I hope this pinned bishop game helps you guys in your own games. This is an h3 King's Indian defense line. Check out the ChessGoals Queen's Gambit course. There's a link in the description. We'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.